If you're doing everything yourself because it feels easier, cheaper, or safer, this episode is for you. And if you've ever said, I'll just handle it myself without stopping to count the costs, I want you to listen closely because doing everything yourself is not free. It's expensive, just not in the obvious ways.
You're listening to the Off Balance Podcast, where faith, family, and business collide. Hosted by Demming, Doctor of Business Administration, business coach, and resilience expert. Each episode features real-life conversations to help entrepreneurs like you build resilience and lead with confidence.
Welcome back to Off Balance. I'm your host, Dr. Brooks. This podcast is for entrepreneurs and professionals who want clarity, structure, and sustainable growth. So far this season, we've talked about structure, busyness, HR risk, motivation, misclassification, bottlenecks, scaling too early, and stewardship. Today, we're talking about what many people wear as a badge of honor, doing it yourself. DIY feels responsible. It feels like control. It feels like savings. It feels like protection. You know, it will be done right. You don't have to explain yourself. You don't have to wait. And early on, doing it yourself makes sense. But the problem is not starting that way. The problem is staying there too long. Let's talk about the real cost. First, time. Every hour you spend doing low-level tasks is an hour not spent leading, planning, or growing. Second, energy. Decision fatigue builds. You're mentally tired before the workday is over. Third, missed opportunities. Growth requires capacity. DIY caps your capacity. Fourth, risk. Without expertise, blind spots increase, mistakes go unnoticed until they're expensive, and finally, identity. You start to see yourself as the worker instead of the leader. And that shift, it matters. From an HR perspective, DIY leadership creates inconsistency. Policies aren't documented, decisions change based on stress, expectations are unclear, and over time, that inconsistency turns into risk. Not because you're careless or because you're unqualified, but because you're carrying too much without structure to support it. When you're leading everything from memory, your business starts depending on how you feel that day. If you're overwhelmed, decisions get delayed. If you're frustrated, decisions may feel sharper than intended. And if you're tired, things get overlooked. And now the team is not responding to a system, they're responding to your capacity. And that's where instability begins. Imagine two employees ask the same question on 2 different days. One day you say yes, another day you say no. Not because the situation changed, but because your bandwidth changed. From your perspective, it feels minor, but from their perspective, it feels unpredictable. And when employees can't predict how decisions are made, they stop trusting the process. That's when you start hearing things like, I'm not sure what's expected. I don't know how decisions get made here. It depends on the day. That language is not about performance. It's about a lack of structure. Now let's go deeper. DIY leadership, it creates invisible bias, not intentional bias, but situational bias. When there are no clear policies, one employee may get flexibility because you can relate to them, another may not, because their situation feels different to you. One person gets more guidance, another is expected to figure it out. Without realizing it, you have created different standards. And over time, that leads to resentment, disengagement, and in some cases, turnover. Not because people can't do the job, but because the environment feels uneven. Another layer is decision fatigue. When everything runs through you, every question becomes a decision. Approvals, clarification, expectations, corrections. And at first, it feels manageable. But as business grows, the volume increases. More people means more questions. More clients means more variables. More growth means more complexity. And you're not just leading, you're constantly reacting. That's where burnout starts to build. Not from working hard, but it's because you're carrying too many unstructured decisions. And this is why HR systems exist, not to slow you down, not to make your business rigid, but to create consistency where human energy fluctuates. HR systems answer questions before they're asked. They define what success look like, how decisions are made, what boundaries exist, and how people are supported. So instead of everything running through you, the business begins to run through structure. And here's the part that many leaders miss. When everything lives in your head, your business is not scalable because your knowledge is not transferable. Your expectations are not visible and your standards are not documented. So every time you hire someone, you start over. You have to re explain, recorrect, realign. That's not growth, that's repetition. Strong businesses don't rely on memory, they rely on clarity. Clarity in roles, clarity in expectations, clarity in accountability, clarity across the board, because clarity reduces confusion. And when confusion exists within an organization, that's where you have mistakes, frustrations, and you have risk growth. So the real issue with DIY leadership is not effort, it's exposure to inconsistent decisions, unclear expectations, uneven experiences, and leadership burnout. And over time, those things compound. That's why so many entrepreneurs, when they DIY everything, they feel like they can't go on vacation. They feel like they can't be sick. They feel like they can't get rest. And so what happens is you're constantly going, going, going. And eventually you're going to reach a brick wall of burnout. So what you thought was going to bring you so much joy is now bringing you resentment, stress, and even sometimes the urge to want to quit. So instead of asking, how do I keep managing everything? Start asking, what needs to be documented so I don't have to? Because every time you document a decision, you remove pressure from yourself and you create stability for your team. That's how you move from reactive leadership to structured leadership. And that's where your business begins to feel lighter, not because you have less work, but because the work is no longer dependent on you alone. So, from a coaching standpoint, DIY is often rooted in self trust issues, not trusting others, not trusting systems, not trusting that support will help. So you carry everything. But leadership isn't about proving strength, it's about building support. Strong leaders know when to stop carrying what no longer belongs to them. So I want you to take a moment and I want you to look at your business and I want you to look at the areas where you lack trust and you're trying to keep control of all of those things. I'm sure there are so many things within your business that no longer belong to you. A lot of that low level work, low level decision making, you can release it because you have hired people, you onboarded people that have the skills and the capabilities to make decisions, to carry out what you have entrusted them to carry. So in education, learners progress faster with guidance, not because they're incapable, but because feedback matters. And business is the same way. Support accelerates growth, isolation slows it down. And so basically, what happens is when you DIY everything, you delay learning for the people that you have brought on board to help you to steward your business. And you can't expect a person to learn and grow and develop in areas if they are isolated from the day to day decisions, if they're isolated from the day to day operations of that area, because you, as the founder, have taken on those tasks, or should I say, won't relinquish those tasks. And so the shift isn't abandoning responsibility, it's basically redefining it. I want you to ask yourself, what only I can do, what no longer requires my involvement, what would improve if I stopped doing it myself? Because leadership is not about doing everything, it's about deciding what deserves your attention. Do all the emails deserve your attention? Does the marketing deserve your attention? Does accounting deserve your attention? Does the decision to bring on new hires, does that deserve your attention? Does adding new services deserve your attention? Whatever the specificity is within your organization, you know exactly what deserves your attention and what doesn't. So here's the reframe. DIY doesn't make you disciplined, it makes you limited. Support isn't weakness, it's wisdom. And clarity is often the first form of support that you need. And then think about it this way. You are paying for services that you are not allowing those within your organization to provide. So essentially, you're just paying people to hang around because you're definitely not paying them for their intellect. You're not paying them for their creativity. You are not paying them for the skills that you hired them to. carry out within your organization. So you are not using their knowledge, skills, and abilities to your full capabilities simply because you are DIYing everything and because you don't want to relinquish control. So here's my invitation to you. If this episode is resonating and you realize DIY is costing you more than it's saving, then this is exactly what we address in the Business and HR Clarity Audit. In that session, we identify what you should stop doing, where support is needed, what risks are being overlooked, and what leadership should look like in your next chapter so your business can grow beyond you. The link to book your audit is in the description of this episode. And I want you to stay with me because in the next episode, we are going to walk through what I look for in the first 30 minutes with the client and how clarity shows up quickly when the right questions are asked. Until then, remember this: doing everything yourself, it feels safe, but it quietly limits what's possible. Talk soon.
Thanks for listening. Please rate this episode and share it with your family and friends. To learn more about your host or to book a coaching session, visit www.brooksdemming.com. Until next time, rise.
Hi, I'm Tiffany of Tiffany Brown Designs. With over 20 years of creative experience across industries, I create and elevate brands one design at a time through intentional graphic and brand design, polished film and video editing, and creative artistry. Even the music you're hearing right now, that was produced by me. I also create custom tracks for websites, intros and outros, and content. So what are you waiting for? Visit TiffanyCBrownGD.com and let's bring your vision to life.